Welcome into an all-new week of Daily Faceoff live, streaming live on the DFO YouTube, and as always, presented by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Hockey, if you're like me, this weekend, the Players' Championship. If you're like Colby, maybe dabbling in the world of tennis, Colby.
I always got my eye on Tennis Channel. You know, we just got through Indian Wells. We're coming into that hard court season, but we got some big majors right around the corner.
I like that. When someone drops in hard court season, that's how you know they're a legit tennis fan. Anyways, excited to have you on the show today. Frank is off at the GM meetings, but he will be on the show tomorrow in some capacity from there. So he'll be giving us some updates. We're going to have Matt Larkin join us in a few minutes for our big segment today. But Colby, as we do every Monday, we kick off the show with the Nightcap, brought to you by JP Wiser's, proud to be the official whiskey of the NHL, offering Canadian hockey fans a premium drink choice to enhance every game night experience across the country. JP Wiser's, the official whiskey of game night. And as we look back on the weekend, Colby, there's kind of one area I want to zero in on, or maybe even one team I want to zero in on, and that is the Vegas Golden Knights. They suffered a handful of, I'd say, pretty disappointing losses. They get shut out by Peter Mrazek yesterday, and the day before that, it was a 4-3 loss in the shootout to the Buffalo Sabres in a game in which they led very, very late into the third period. And one of the more viral moments of this weekend came when Thomas Hertl tried to force a feed to Jack Eichel on the empty net. He could have sealed up the game. It could have been a win. And instead it turns into a shootout loss because Buffalo breaks this up, goes back the other way and scores. Your thoughts on this play by Hertl? And then I guess we'll get into a bigger Golden Knights discussion.
Yeah, I mean, listen, obviously this doesn't play very well when it happens the way it does, but you know, you're trying to feed your guy. He's home. He's in Buffalo. He had the game, you know, the third goal, which was pretty late in the period. Again, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback this one, Tyler, but I got to tell you, if I was in that situation and I had Eichel coming down, I might have looked to do the exact same thing. But, you know, you look at the results and it's the 3-2 overtime loss to Pittsburgh. It's the 6-5 loss to LA. Before that, they had a couple of decent wins against Toronto and New Jersey. But I just want to say this about Vegas. I'm not worried. You know, I do believe that we are now at the point where once we hit game 70 and you've got those last 12 games where the big boys, they flip a switch. And we talked about this with the Edmonton Oilers, and I won't go there yet. I just don't feel a lot of concern. I know they're well coached in Vegas. The goaltender just gets the new, what was it, a 6-year contract, I believe. You know, Jack Eichel is going to continue to do things that very few players in the National Hockey League can do. You know, you're not waiting for Stone to come off IR and see if he's magically going to be healthy this year. So again, right now, I just don't feel a big sense of problems for the Vegas Golden Knights. You know, you do got to remember they did get points in the Buffalo game, and they got points in the Pittsburgh loss as well. So it's not like they're just going home empty-handed night in and night out.
Yeah, and as Frank would say, milk, milk, squirt, squirt. Just pick up points wherever you can kind of get them. And you look at their record in the last 10, 5-3-2, so 5-5 straight up. But there's a glass half full view of that, which is what you just said. And it's points in 7 of 10. And when you're down the stretch like this and you are first in your division, both on points percentage and straight up points, only 15 games to go. If you can make a handful of your losses, OT losses, and also take care of business, then you should be in a pretty good spot. I'm not overly concerned with Vegas and this little stretch either. I also think, I mean, you mentioned, you know, Mark Stone, he's healthy, he's playing. They are going to get Shea Theodore back at some point, right? So that's another area, even if it's for, call it night 1 of the playoffs, even if it's game 2, game 3 of the playoffs, you know you're getting that help at some point with Theodore. So maybe we'll turn our attention to that race in the Pacific Division, Kolb. And listen, I think it's fair to say kind of the LA Kings have gotten hot. They've won 5 in a row. The Oilers sputtering, although they looked a little bit better this weekend. Vegas, we just talked about how they've been a little bit up and down and a little bit rocky. When you look at this division, though, the LA Kings, all of a sudden, if they win their games in hand, they're only going to be 1 point back of the Vegas Golden Knights. And listen, I totally agree with what you're saying about, like, we're not going to worry about Vegas until, you know, this stretch maybe goes on for another 10 games. We're not going to worry about Edmonton until, you know, maybe it's game 75 or 77 and they still look poor. But what about the flip side with LA? Are they changing your mind on them at all? Are you starting to view them a little bit differently?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Tyler, I know you're not going to like me saying this, and I've never said this in previous years, but if the playoffs started right now, and you asked me who was going to win that series, I would take the LA Kings based on what I've seen. And I think that's fair based on what we have seen. They're just playing a more complete game. They're scoring more goals than they did last year. They're much more aggressive. Um, they're insane when they don't have Brant Clark in the lineup because he is the one guy who brings you a ton of mobility and offense. I mean, yes, I know they have Drew Doughty. You know, he is on the back nine of his career. He did deal with a major injury this season. But at the end of the day, yeah, I like the way the LA Kings are playing. I like the way that they're getting up the ice. You watch them enter the zone on the power play. They had that little trick play the other night that resulted in an Adrian Kempe breakaway opportunity and finish. So, look, I could say this. The one seeds have a much easier path, right? I'll tell you, the wild card teams are not scary teams to me in the West, but boy, those 2-3 matchups in those divisions are going to be absolute gauntlets to get through.
Yeah, the wins for the LA Kings on these five or during this 5-game heater, they beat the Preds 1-0, the Caps 3-0, they beat the Islanders, they beat the Golden Knights, they beat the Blues. So a bit of a mix there. Yeah, sure, a couple of bottom feeders, but again, wins over the Golden Knights and Capitals, and they're certainly impressive. I'm not writing them off to come and win this division. The one thing maybe working against them is that out of Edmonton, Vegas, and of course the Kings do have the toughest schedule. It's on the easier side. It's the 18th most difficult schedule from here till the end of the season, where the Golden Knights are 24th and the Oilers have one of the easiest schedules in the league at 28th, and that's partially or mainly because they have to play the San Jose Sharks 3 times out of their final 15 games here. But if you had to kind of handicap it, do you give the Kings any fighting chance of continuing this heater and maybe passing Vegas, or is that just maybe a bridge too far?
I think it's a bridge too far. I don't see it happening because I just think that Vegas understands how important finishing one is. And I feel like they know how to go to that killer instinct. We've yet to see the LA Kings show us a killer instinct from now until, let's say, mid-May, right? They've lost in the first round to Edmonton a couple of years. They've had all these issues that, they've sort of seemingly sorted out this year with, changing their neutral zone and changing the way that they forecheck into a little bit more of an aggressive manner. So I still like Vegas to finish first in this division. And look, Edmonton doesn't give me a lot of confidence that they're going to get hot and reel off a group of wins to catch Vegas as well. So I think this division will finish similarly to how it looks right now. The 2-3 seed, that may flip, but ultimately I think we see the matchups we're going to get.
Yeah, that's fair. If there's maybe one reason to believe in the Edmonton Oilers, it could be the guy you see on your screen right now, and that's Leon Draisaitl continuing what I think is a Hart Trophy season. Frank and I did have that debate last week, so we don't need to get into it again, but his point streak now up to 15 games. Sorry, make that 16 games. It's the longest point streak we've seen in the NHL this season, and he even picked up an overtime winner on Friday, which, again, might be a bit of a spark for the Oilers, who've now won 2 in a row after starting their road trip on a bit of a miserable note. We're going to maybe talk about the Oilers in that Paper Tigers conversation. Maybe not. I'm curious to know where you go there. But first, Colby, Frank and I, over the last week, have been talking about some of the awards races now that we're in, again, the home stretch of the regular season here. We did the Hart, we did the Norris, we did the Vezina last week. I want to talk about the Jack Adams. And right now at Bet365, Spencer Carberry is the runaway favorite. It's not even close. -900. That's implied odds of 90% that he will win the Jack Adams Award. Carberry, what he's done with the Capitals, obviously significant, obviously impressive. But let me ask you, does he deserve to be this much of a runaway favorite, or are there some other names that you want to give some love to?
Okay, so here's why I'm going to say no, because I thought this team would be really good this year. And if you go back and you go to the archives of the season preview shows we did on Morning Cup of Hockey, and I don't know if Jeremiah is in the chat today, but if he is, I know he will back me up on the fact that I said at the beginning of the year, the offseason was incredible for the Washington Capitals. What they did to their back end, yes, they're getting goaltending now, like at a very, very high level, but I'm not shocked that they're where they are. Like, did I think they'd run away with the East? No, but I thought they would easily be a playoff team in the Metropolitan Division, right? So that's where I think Arneal comes into play. I think the Arniel move was a little bit criticized. I think people felt like it was just sort of an easy way out to just promote from within and not spend a ton of money. But I just look at the details in the way that the Winnipeg Jets are playing. Like, I watch the way that they go back on pucks better than any other year. I watch not just the defenseman who goes back on the puck, his partner. I watch how the wingers get back into their spots. I watch how when they don't execute their forecheck properly, how they come back and get above the puck and the back pressure that they put. And I just looked at the fact that, yes, Winnipeg has been really good in the regular season before, but they haven't had the crazy slide that we've seen them have in previous years. And I just think their game is more detailed. I think it's more suitable for playoffs. Sure, it's all going to depend on Hellebuck, but I think Arniel should be closer to the top of this race with Spencer Carberry. Now, I think Carb should be one, but I think Arniel should really be a close second, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not easy to be an assistant who jumps into that head coaching role. Like, we've seen plenty of other times where a guy has done that and they've kind of flamed out, right? It's hard to make that jump when you're with the same team. So I think that's totally fair. A couple of other guys I think deserve a lot of love in this race. What about Ryan Huska in Calgary? That's a team who is exceeding expectations. They are currently, by points percentage, holding on to a playoff spot. And I guess you could say they're a minus 21 goal differential. How much of it is Dustin Wolf, their super rookie goaltender, masking some other issues? So I think there's a case for Huska to be a finalist, maybe, or maybe he would get like a top 5 vote if I had a ballot. But there's another guy who I think deserves to be right up there with Carberry, and it's Travis Green in Ottawa. He's pretty low down on the ballot. And again, you're way better at the systems and all of that stuff. I'm a vibes guy, Colby. I'm looking at a guy who took over a room, who had, again, basically a whole room of guys who've never been to the dance before and have been trying to push through and get there the last number of years and failed and failed and failed. And what he did, one, he stopped them from having that early season slide that always seems to be the problem. You know, they blow their own foot off in November and they're out of the race. But even when they had that slide in February, he got him to snap out of it. And it wasn't crippling the way it was. And I just think, you know, that Ottawa team losing 6 in a row, I thought it was going to cripple them. And it absolutely didn't. They're just bouncing right to 6 in a row, one of the hottest teams in the league. I think Travis Green in Ottawa deserves some love.
Can I propose a question to you? And I'll echo J-Rock in the chat. And I know he has said this in our chat as well when these discussions have come up. What about Paul Maurice? What about John Cooper? Why is it only the team that wasn't supposed to maybe be good that we talk about coach of the year with? Like, Paul Maurice is going to take his team potentially back to another Stanley Cup this year, right? I mean, like, John Cooper, yet again, look at Tampa Bay. Like, they might be the scariest team right now up that way. So we do ignore teams with coaches that were supposed to be good, that put together good season after good season. So it is a fair thought and a fair point from J-Rock, and he's been consistent on that basically all season since we've been talking about that. So I'll tip my cap to him for bringing a good discussion point.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, the fact John Cooper is he not the best coach in the NHL?
He's never won one.
Yeah, like how is he never won one? It is a little bit of an award where, again, maybe me, vibes guy, the vibes and the narratives can kind of run away with it instead of looking at who is truly
Go from one vibes guy to another, from my morning partner now to you.
But yeah, no, that's fair. I think with all the turnover in Tampa Bay as well, Sergachev off the blue line, they reconstructed things there. You go from Stamkos to Gensel, like that bottom 6 was pretty depleted for most of the season, and he found a way to make it work until reinforcements came at the deadline. So yeah, I think if there ever is a year for John Cooper to get some love, it's maybe this year. Craig Berube not going to be in the conversation for Coach of the Year. We're going to talk Leafs in a second, but first, really enjoyed the Daily Faceoff Roundtable article that went up this weekend over on the site and wanted to throw it your way, Colby. It's basically this. Matt Larkin is going to be our next guest. He loves the term paper tigers. It's fraudulent. The cup contender who you're looking at, Colby, and going, they have no shot at going on a deep playoff run this year. Connor Hellebuck is our picture. I think that's maybe a little unfair. Are the Jets your answer, or are you going somewhere else?
Tyler, I'm going somewhere else, and you're going to hate me for it. Okay. And it pains me to do it because, you know, I've been riding this train with you. I've been staying up late the last couple of years, and you know me, I like going to bed early, but I'm really worried about the Edmonton Oilers. We still talk about them like they're a cup contender. I do not believe they are a cup contender. They have not shown me any stretch of hockey consistently this season where I felt like their thoroughness with the puck, their attention to detail in the defensive zone. How many times do the Edmonton Oilers look like they're fine defensively, and then all of a sudden, 1.5, 2 Mississippi later, the puck's in the back of their net. They've lost body position. I hate to say it, but it's how I believe. And boy, man, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, they're two of my favorite players to watch. I used to come on Oilers Nation all the time with you and just talk about how much fun this team has been, but it just doesn't look the same this year. And I don't believe they should be in the conversation with those other teams.
Where I'll push back on that a little bit is they did have a stretch December 1 till January 31st. They were the best team in the NHL by a pretty significant margin. 741 points percentage in that stretch. Second in the league, Washington was 722. Third in the league was a 670. So that gap was pretty big. But I understand all of it. I mean, I had a tweet the other day that popped off. I was like, man, the Oilers used to be fun to watch. They used to play fast-paced hockey, and they'd go. And they don't do that anymore. They don't play quickly. They were never a big, rush attack team, but in the offensive zone, they would just have teams in a spin cycle. They don't have that. So, I agree. I'm not upset at you saying that. I'm smart enough to understand there are holes here. Goaltending's a problem. The depth outside of McDavid and Draisaitl is a problem where I'll maybe lean towards, let's give them some time. I think the blue line with Ekholm back is going to be better than it's ever been in the Connor McDavid era. And could that make the goaltending look better?
And Frederick. And you'll get Frederick, who I think is going to be a really, really good, middle six of your lineup type of guy. Something that, you could probably use a little bit more of. But, again, I know there's a lot of Edmonton people that are going to watch this and they're going to be furious. But hey, this is what I see. This is how I feel. I'd love to be wrong because, again, Connor McDavid in the Stanley Cup Finals is a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah. Just on the Jets quickly, because I really hummed and hawed about them just because we've seen this song and dance with them before. But I'm not worried because I don't think Connor Hellebuck's going to have another bad playoffs. I think sometimes we get a little bit too carried away with the poor playoff performer narrative. And sometimes it is just, if you have sometimes it's just unlucky. And when I look at Connor Hellebuck, early in his career, he had some really, really good playoff performances. He's been in the postseason now 6 times. His save percentages, .922, .913, .904, .931. And then these last couple of seasons, it's fallen off the rails, but he's so good. I think it's almost like, to bring it back to the golf reference I made earlier, it's like betting on Scotty Scheffler at a major. Okay, he might not win one. He might have an off tournament here or there, but at the end of the day, there's no goalie I'd put my money behind with more confidence than Connor Hellebuck. So I'm not willing to put the Jets in the paper tiger conversation.
I'm not either.
Yeah, I think the Hellebuck narrative is a little bit overblown. And as you touched on in the Adams conversation, they're very, very well coached. So I know a couple of
good.
Yeah. I know a couple of people had the Leafs in that conversation, which is a nice tie into our big segment for today.
Are we really calling the Leafs a cup contender? I didn't think highly enough of them to put them in the paper tiger conversation.
Well, there you go. Let's get to the All 32 today. It's brought to you by Tim Hortons Canada. Your favorite contest is back. Roll Up to Win is back at Tim Hortons, and that means you can win millions of amazing prizes with just the swipe of your thumb. Imagine turning your routine Tim's run into an unforgettable vacation with Sell-Off Vacations, $1,000 Rakuten cash prize, or an all-new, all-electric 2025 Volkswagen ID Buzz. You only have until March 23rd. Download the Tim's app today and get rolling. Always a pleasure to welcome in Matt Larkin from Daily Faceoff. Amongst many things, you do have your finger on the pulse of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Matt Larkin, and that is where we are digging into things today. Their downturn perfectly timed up with the Mitch Marner drama. How much of a connection are you making there?
I mean, right now, so they've lost 5 of their last 6 games, Tyler. They're not exactly doing a great job dispelling the idea that this was a distraction. And you have to look at that situation and just think, if you had any inkling that Mitch Marner was not going to say yes to waiving that no trade clause, why do you do it? Why do you make that request? It creates this huge distraction. Now it's leaked out. Everyone's talking about it. Even just the idea that the Leafs made a play for Mikko Rantanen at all. If you look at the trade offer that reportedly didn't have Marner, well, if they accept that deal, if that deal goes through, it still pushes Marner out because you're signing Rantanen to an extension. So that is also a distraction. It's been a circus. And to me, They are playing like a team that is, in fact, very distracted.
And look, I will say, Matt, I really liked what they did at the deadline. I thought they, everyone's like, well, they didn't add enough. Well, when you've got the big four, you're adding depth. What are we talking about here? I thought Brandon Carlo and Scott Lawton were perfect additions, but if you're looking to be rescued, you're looking in the wrong place. You've already got the players that are supposed to rescue you, but I want to turn my attention to the goaltending, okay? Because, neither guy has grabbed it and become the every game starter, right? I know Wall had some injuries, but there's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of rotation. When we get to the playoffs, okay, what can we expect out of that position? Are we going to see them go with a rotation in the playoffs?
It's tough. I know that Craig Berube is not a big fan of rotation, and I think even statistically, if you look at the history of Stanley Cup winners, it's usually always best to commit to one guy, not having someone going over his shoulder, looking over his shoulder all the time. And it's tough because it looked like Colby. Anthony Stolarz was pulling away. He had some of the best numbers in the league. And what happens over those last couple of games, crucial games, major important stretch against Florida and Ottawa, he looks mortal. And it's like, oh my God, here we go again. Now, Joseph Woll, who I think looked pretty good against Utah the other day, seems to be pulling even, and it feels like nothing is resolved. We're a month away from the playoffs. I don't think you can go into the playoffs with a situation where it's going to be switching game to game. You need to commit to one guy. But who is it going to be? Joseph Woll was an absolute world beater against the Boston Bruins last year, so we know he has signs of that clutch gene if his body cooperates. At the same time, based on merit, Stolarz has been the better goaltender throughout the year. I think in either case, the Leafs are in a better spot than they've been in recent years with their goaltending. But it also is interesting to me that both guys have looked a little more mortal compared to the first part of the year. And then it's not a coincidence that this team, which depended on the Leafs goaltending, they depended on their goalie so much, they're not doing so well because that was kind of papering over a lot of the flaws.
I'm seeing today, I don't know enough because I'm not following the team on day to know why the fans are frustrated with Craig Berube, but I think it's an interesting conversation. And listen, it's not that much different than one I was having in Edmonton 10 days ago, where I was telling people like, hey, if you are calling for another coach to be fired, it is no longer time to look at the coach. It's time to look at the core group of guys and go, how come Tampa Bay and Pittsburgh and they can win all those cups with their star players with the same coach, but you need a fourth, fifth coach now? Maybe walk me through what the frustrations are with Berube, and are they justified? Are they fair? Do you think he can do things differently to improve this team?
It depends on who you're talking to. I think in terms of the culture of frustration with Berube, the Venn diagram of people that were really in the Kyle Dubas camp, I think would overlap there, right? So, because Craig Berube is more of a throwback coach, and he preaches a north-south style, and it's all about simplifying the Leafs game, making fewer mistakes. This is a team that thrives on east-west hockey because they have so much skill. The problem is, if you're making this shift to this new mentality, well, why are you not backing it up with your statistics? The Leafs are not good defensively. So if you've changed your style, you've made your team more conservative offensively, but you're not actually doing a better job defending, then what's the point? I think that's why people are starting to ask the question, do we need to get back to fire wagon hockey? I always joke that the Leafs, when they're down 3-0 in a game, are the 1977 Montreal Canadiens. When they play just kind of wild and free, that's when they're at their best. They've been much more tight in their play this year. The big question for me is, though, why do we have to have this discussion about Berube and litigate it now? What's going to matter is, does this style translate better to the playoffs? That's the big question about the entire season. The Leafs, they don't look great right now, but they are the biggest team in the NHL. They're the biggest team in the league in 7 years, and they have a Stanley Cup winning coach who preaches a simpler game. So will this game, once we get to April, actually translate to better playoff success?
Yeah, and I think one of the frustrations that I picked up on the other night, Matt, was the fact that they switched the lines. They moved Domi up. Domi gets a goal, and then all of a sudden you're back in the second period and Marner's back up on the first line. And I think people get frustrated and feel like those guys are never held accountable enough. And listen, when you have these superstar players that make all this money and they account for all your salary cap, it's a little bit different. The last thing I have for you, Matt, is I want to ask you about the trade deadline ads. And, I've seen a little bit here and there, but I haven't seen a ton. And I know it's fairly new, but what would you say the early returns individually on Lawton and Carlo have been?
Yeah, I think Carlo has definitely been the more impressive of the two. It's hard to compare positionally, but to me, he's been exactly as advertised. I know people were on about, okay, he was -2 in his first few minutes as a Leaf against Colorado. You can throw that out the window. He's been really strong. the Leafs, the chances when he's out there with Riley, I think it's something like 5-1 high danger chances at 5-on-5. And to me, that's exactly what you hope for, because Morgan Riley always plays well with a big, strong righty, right? Ilya Lyubushkin, Luke Schenn. If you keep him with Brandon Carlo, but that's the thing, Craig Berube, you got to keep Riley and Carlo together. Don't experiment, keep throwing Oliver Ekman Larson into the mix. Those two are already showing chemistry, and I think that could absolutely solve the second pair problem with the Leafs. So Carlo looks good. Scott Laughton, it's good that he's showing some energy, trying to get a fight in there, even though the team did not respond. It's still early. Again, you're a third liner. It's not like you're going to be putting up huge point totals every night. It's just going to be a matter of, can you find your groove? Can you bring energy at the right time? Can you shut down the opposition's best players? Can you make a mark on the penalty kill? Scott Laughton, I think the jury is more out, and I think it's too soon. A lot of people just like to wring their hands and make passing judgments on Twitter. It's way too soon. Just let these guys gel. Let's see what happens in the playoffs and see if they actually fit. Because on paper, to me, the Leafs went out and got the exact two things they needed. Third line center, right shot deep for the second pair. Perfect job on the shopping list, and you just got to let them settle in.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of teams who will maybe look back at the regular season, and no matter what happens in the playoffs, they'll be like, hey, we still had a good year. These are good building blocks. The Leafs are in the camp of no, they are judged solely on what will happen in April. So never a dull moment, Matt. Appreciate you popping on. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, boys.
Moving along, Daily Faceoff inbox question, hashtag askdfo. Colby, we got one in from Miller Time, who wants to know who gets the second wildcard spot in the West. We talked about the Pacific race. We really didn't do a lot of playoff talk in the West. Calgary right now holding on to that spot on points percentage. Vancouver, St. Louis, though, tied at 73 points. It is razor thin margins here. Who do you like?
I think I like Vancouver. Elias Pettersson has shown signs of life for the first time all season over the last couple of weeks. Quinn Hughes, remember, was dealing with some injuries, and we just know what an impactful guy he is. And so I think when you have Quinn Hughes healthy, and you have Elias Pettersson, again, showing signs of just having a pulse. That's all we're asking for. We have moved the bar so low for Elias Pettersson at this point. But I think overall, again, St. Louis is sort of just a mishmash. Although, look, 7-2-1 in their last 10. You certainly cannot ignore that. They have the Jim Montgomery factor. We know he wants to play north. We know he's a guy who holds players accountable. But ultimately, I think Quinn Hughes and then Elias Pettersson scoring some goals at this time of year is going to propel them into that spot. But listen, I'd be thrilled if it was St. Louis. I would love to see those guys get in. I'm a big Jim Montgomery fan. I love that building down there, especially come playoff time, but I think it'll be Vancouver.
I'll take Calgary. I think Dustin Wolf just has it in him. I think he's a stone cold killer. And I think if any team can go on a quick little run here and maybe go 7-2-1 like the Blues, again, the Blues might be on their heater and due to maybe decline a little bit. I think Calgary's still got a little bit more juice in them. So I'll take the Flames. The Canucks, though, to your point, they are the betting odds favorites, which ties in nicely to our daily bets brought to you by Bet365, where every nail biting overtime win is a barn burner. Every face-off, hat-trick, power play, shot on goal in between is suspenseful. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365, an official partner of the NHL. Download the app today and use the code NATION to get in on the game. A couple of picks for you tonight. Starting out east, the Blue Jackets hosting the Devils. The Devils 5-5 in their last 10. Columbus 5-5 in their last 10. Losers of 3 straight, but back on home ice, where they're one of the better home teams in the NHL. 28-4 on the season. 20-8-4. And they're dogs, so I like Columbus as home dogs tonight. New Jersey, not great away from the Prudential Center ever either, 19-17 straight up. And then on the left side there, a couple of names you don't hear about a lot in the gambling world, but both Pavel Zacha and Noah Cates have hit their shot props in 4 of their last 5. Play them together, and it's plus 203. And Colby, that brings us to garbage time, where for the second time in a week, Connor Bedard was given a 10-minute misconduct. Is this a young player who's just very frustrated by what's going on around him and the team, or is this a guy who's maybe going to need to change in order for his franchise to take that step forward?
Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm hearing not a lot of good things coming out of Chicago about Connor Bedard. We have Pat Maroon on our show every week, and listen, he says all the right things, and he backs up his teammate because we ask him these questions and he's had every opportunity, to say different, but he's backed him up. He's had his back going back to the Jeremy Roenick thing. But when you start to see all these little things coming up, sorry, Oliver wanted to say hello to everybody today, but you start to add these things up, and the first one was a misunderstanding, and then the second one, and then like how many times are we going to say, well, maybe this is a young kid who just needs a little bit of an attitude adjustment? I don't know. Ultimately, I assume he must have said something to Chris Rooney more than we're aware of for Rooney to throw him out. Rooney's been around for a long time. He might have wanted to set a standard with him, but Pat told us he had no idea what he said or what he did in the scrum. I think he was pleading the fifth, in my opinion. But ultimately, I would feel some concern if I was a Blackhawks fan right now, counting on my entire franchise being built around Connor Bedard.
Interesting times in Chicago. They are not yet officially eliminated from the playoffs. There's only one team in the league who officially has the E next to their name. It's the San Jose Sharks, but that's when things are getting good, when you start to see that letter pop up on the standings. We'll maybe talk a bit more about that tomorrow on the show. Colby, thanks for hopping in. Thanks for filling in. Always fun with you.
I appreciate you having me on, and I'm sure Frank's sitting on a beach somewhere right now drinking a pina colada down in South Florida.
Yeah. You can hear Colby's interview with Pat Maroon on Morning Cup of Hockey right here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. Him and Johnny Lazarus are live Monday through Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern time. So wake up in the morning with Colby and Johnny. Never a bad idea. Thank you, Colby. Big shout out to Pat Puff, our producer, Matt Larkin, for popping in as well. That is a wrap on another edition of Daily Faceoff Live. We'll see you all right back here tomorrow at noon Eastern. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Saravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.